structure so that we could train a category of people called ophthalmic assistants that would help the surgeons to relieve the caseload. And he had to give up certain rules that the government had, which was trying to make it legitimized in the international medical community. I mean, there was a little political structure going on here. And what he wanted from me, of course, was more money, and because it's an American foundation. And we all understood, and we came together each with our wish list. And I was a little nervous because I was having to be straight, which I hadn't been for years. I mean, I was having to be representing the team back home, and I couldn't give away the store, and I was a little nervous that I could play tight enough in this situation, and I was, you know, doing my beads nervously and trying to remember Ram, and we were about to start the bargaining, and I was caught in being the chairman of the board, I mean, in playing my role properly. I was caught in my role. I wasn't playing it. I was caught in it. And at that moment, I happened to look into his eyes, because when you're caught in a role, you don't look into people's eyes, because you're busy being somebody. And I just happened to look into his eyes, and there he was sitting there looking at me. And our eyes held for a moment, and that was just long enough for me to realize that he was right here. He wasn't caught. I mean, he was an Easterner. He knew much more than I did. And he freed me at that moment. And we met. We suddenly just fell into each other's eyes. Just that moment, we fell into love, really. And then we recognized the oneness of, it's like two souls. Well, what do we do today? Well, I'll tell you what. I'll be the Minister of Health. Okay. Well, I'll be the chairman of the board. And suddenly, we were just playing these games out. And then we fought fiercely. It was like Monopoly. And I'll trade you Park Avenue for the B&O Railroad. And we got into this bargaining, but the more we bargained, it was like making love, the more intimate we got. And the oneness allowed us to play our game, not sloppily, but very well. But we didn't get caught in the game, so we weren't opponents. We were collaborating in our competition, okay? And so the competition kept bringing us closer and closer together. That's the way in which it worked. Questions? Yes. He's asking, in those systems where they work with sexual energies in terms of lust and all, to arouse that stuff, to examine it and work with it, I think that it takes somebody who is extremely conscious and extremely clear themselves about it to play with those energies without getting lost in it. And I think most people that say they're doing Tantra are grossly rationalizing in a way to justify their lust. I think that there's a tremendous amount of fraudulence in that game. I think there are very few people that are able to do sexual Tantra, because it takes absolute one-pointedness of mind, and where you start from up here, and then you delve down here. You don't start from here. You hear that? So that I would say that about, in my experience, about 80% of what I hear of people talking about Tantra and working with sexual energies is gross rationalization, and that a very few people I've ever met are able to do that thing successfully.
This podcast is brought to you by the Love Serve Remember Foundation and ramdas.org. We appreciate you listening, and we appreciate all the support that you've given us. Please continue that support and donate at ramdas.org. We can then continue to share what Ram Dass has been sharing for all of these years. Thank you.
The game is to be where you are, be it honestly and as consciously as you know how.
Watch the latest Ram Dass documentary film, Becoming Nobody, on Gaia.com.
Of course, there was fear in losing that familiar identity. But there was always also wonder.
The Gaia.com library supports you with transformational content. See it for yourself and go to Gaia.com/BeHereNow and check out the Be Here Now playlist, curated just for you. Visit Gaia.com/BeHereNow and start your free trial today.
Welcome to Ram Dass Here and Now. I'm Raghu Marcus, back for another episode. This one is, we've got a talk called Living and Dying in the Spirit, and I think it could also be easily called Living and Dying in the Moment, because Ram Dass talks a lot here about working with death, and in a way that is, acknowledges being present in every moment. It's stuff I've been thinking about lately, actually. That's probably why I gravitated to this one. And it's a bit of an ongoing theme for me since my parents left about a year ago, just over a year ago, a year and a few months. And boy, that just doesn't go away. Many of you will acknowledge that. There is a constant stream of memories in so many different ways that trigger stuff. But the process of dying and being, if you get fortunate actually to be able to be with your parents while they're passing, it's an incredibly great privilege in one way, and also a bit of a training ground. I was with my father when he was starting to get weaker, and but he was still getting around, so it was still probably a year and a half before he actually left. And I was helping him do some stuff and getting him to the bathroom and all that kind of thing. And, and a struggle getting clothes off, when you can't bend over. In this case, he had Parkinson's. But he just looked at me in one moment and he said, "Get ready, you're next. Get used to this." That's what he said. "Get used to this, you're next," which was scary in the moment. But there is a way in which going through all of this makes that very present. So back to Ram Dass's talk here. Let's see. He starts talking about, I love this little part. This is sort of him getting into this idea. But once you've read all of the different stories of the great holy beings in the world's different religions, Jesus Christ, Buddha, Ram, Krishna, so you get what he calls a vector view of your journey. I love that, vector view. And basically these stories, they give us clues, clues to show the possibility of being able to transcend our very great attachment, our very great penchant for anger, lust, greed, whatever it is, self-interest in the big general way, so that there's a possibility. You can see that there's a possibility, and it also they show you where you're not, and and sort of give you give you the aids and show you where the traps are going to be. So that vector view of your journey, that's something that we all encountered at some point, that gave us some kind of structure and a target to shoot at, whatever you want to call it. So love that. And then he goes into in this talking about death and the Bardos and the Tibetans, and all of that is interesting. But I don't think I mentioned this, because see, this is February 10th, 1970, and I know that because our wonderful team at Love Serve Remember Foundation has gotten us to a point where we actually have a master spreadsheet, and we know what we have, and we have a lot of this data, although we're still missing some and still trying to collect. So we're able now to reference what it is that we have, and this particular one was February 10th, 1970. Ram Dass went back to India that year in, I believe, September, maybe August, September. So this is just before he went back. And so it's interesting when he's really expounding about stuff from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. He had been studying that. Of course, that has to do with the psychedelics. He and Leary wrote the psychedelic book, which was based on that. So I love one metaphor here, though. I got to share this one because it really attends again to my own experience, which is he talks about you know, you're opened up by these stories. You're opened up by psychedelics. You're opened up by who pass people pass you by. I mean, for a moment, they're a teacher for you, and they just, they edge you into a direction which you follow. So you're open to being able to surrender and really let go in situations. And one good example of this is, of course, he talks about taking your parents to the Fillmore. The Fillmore Ballroom, the great rock and roll hall from the old days. So it's an example, you put them in there and they go out of their minds. They can't stand it. They have no concept of dying because they don't have that connection to the psychedelic experience that many of us had back then. They don't have that surrender into death, into ego death quality, which is highly, highly important. So they freak out. This is kind of a funny analogy, but in my own case, both my parents, the opposite of that. I mean, not right away. And this was all after meeting Neem Karoli Baba Maharaji. When I came back from India, and my first wife, mother of my children, and I got married in a teepee, on this farm that my father owned. And to my best recollection, people were pretty out there on psychedelics, including my dad. So this wasn't true of him, and for the most part, it probably is. And so this talk, so then it goes into, from that concept of, being able to be comfortable with dying, is he goes into the talking about how that moment and that understanding precludes being able to just be here now and be in the present moment. That concept of surrender into there's a trust, there's a faith there, it's okay. And you had that training and through psychedelics, of course, and then through many other mediums, including all the way, as I just discussed, being with your parents who are passing. So those are powerful transformers. And so he talks about it's apparent that what is evolving along with our consciousness is an entirely different concept, entirely different understanding and an approach to the reality of dying. So that starts to take the fear out of it, and you, on a daily basis, are bringing this surrender, and the analogy for many of us is, of course, a psychedelic trip where you let go at one point with trust that it's all okay, even if you don't have a body. So living and dying in the spirit is the topic here. And thanks for the support, everybody. Please continue to do so. We have so many different initiatives going on with Love, Serve, Remember and ramdas.org. We're just about, we've gotten so much of this media digitized, cataloged, described, and keyworded so that you all can, everybody, all of us can find it fast and easy. And we had to change up the website to be able to accommodate that, and you're going to see that in the near future here. It's our summer project. It'll be done before the summer actually starts, but keep supporting us. We need it, and we appreciate it. And until next week, and Ram Dass, here and now.
Now, every system that has been evolved by a being higher than the system, in other words, the words of the rishis were the realized writers who were the vehicles through which the law was spread forth. And in fact, all of the holy writings are just those things. They are the manifestation into word of the living spirit. They're the statement of the laws within the spirit. And every one of these is there in order to help you finish with a place that you have to run through yet. In other words, Christ as a message represents, the Jesus story represents a certain story. And by your opening yourself sufficiently to take in that story, the Buddha story represents a certain storyline. And for you to open yourself enough to take in the Buddha story, the Moses story, the Mohammed story, the Ram story, the Krishna story, the Shiva story. All of these are manifestations in order to give you clues, to give you keys. Now, often the clues are messages that show you where you're not, which is the only clues you really need at the moment. So you can get done with where you're not. Cook the seeds that are uncooked. So you can use, for example, astrology to give yourself a new vector view, take one, new vector view of your own journey. And that vector view will help you finish another place. All of these forms, enneagrams, exercises are all aids and they're all traps. They are all aids and they're all traps. And the problem is that when you have lived most of your life on one level and suddenly are handed the keys to understand the next level, the amount of power that you're given through it is so awesome to little you that you tend to get hooked. I mean, astrology is power. Because you know more when you understand astrology than you do when you understand the MMPI. That's the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. Or an electroencephalogram. When you really have grokked astrology. But the thing is, if you're going to embrace it, use it, go on. The I Ching, the Tarot, all very high statements, the Tao, extraordinarily high devices for waking you up. Work with them, grok them, become them, and go on. You just eat stuff and out comes light. Just be a stuff converter. Just pass it up your spine. Pass it up your spine. For those of you that might be confused about the relation of, say, the Tibetan Book of the Dead to the Kundalini Yoga, something like that, you can see the relationship that we are primarily working on moving energy from the gross planes up and up through all the centers, through from the lower three centers up through to the seventh center. And when you die, then the Tibetan Book of the Dead is a description of the 49 days after that. See, what happens is you're first handed the full trip. You get the clear white light, first bardo. And what the monk says to you who's hanging out with your dead body, he says to your spirit, he says, hang on, this is it. You know, let yourself open. But usually what happens is when a person dies, the light's too blinding because they haven't been ready for it, because they've got all these desires and attachments that keep them with finite vision. See, it's the same thing as there is an exercise in India for looking at the sun. You start at sunrise and you focus on the sun and you look directly into it without blinking until it sets. Okay? And the people that do it never damage their eyes. But a person in the United States who might turn on with acid and then look directly into the sun may burn out his retina. And the reason he might do that is because he's focusing, because he's attached, because he's trying to see. And it's only at a very high degree of complete giving up of ego that you wouldn't destroy your body that way. To be able to do it all day long. Just sit in the desert. Very high meditation.
See, but beings at that level are almost ones who can live on light. In other words, they can take energy in from the higher planes and transmute it and use it to maintain their lower planes as well as the higher planes. Those are very evolved beings. Very evolved beings. But some of you, I'm sure, have started to notice you eat less and less. You're less and less desirous of food all the time and don't seem to be falling apart as a result of it. So you begin to understand that the whole model about food and oxygen and the whole thing was part of the physical plane package, the nature package. It's a model of who you are, and we all agree to it, most of us. But then somebody goes out of the cave and sees the sunlight and comes rushing back and says it isn't like that at all. Okay? So when you die, you go into this first bardo, and then the monk says, hold on to it, but you can't, see, and it's so bright, unless you're a realized being at that point. Like Mahatma Gandhi, when he's shot, he doesn't go, I've been shot, or save the republic, or, like, or, get them, or, I love you, or anything. He just says, Ram, boom. Now, we've had enough run of assassinations in this country that we've got a comparative thing. How likely is it for any of the beings that were assassinated in this country to be thinking about the spirit, or be thinking in such a way as to free themselves at that point? Because as high and exquisite as the people were who were assassinated in many ways, high and low both together, they all had attachments. And that means you're right, they're going to come back. Because you only are finished with the round of births and deaths, with the wheel, when at the moment of death, you are so free of attachment that when that all and everything is you, you can be it. And you don't pull back. Like too much, man. Can't ever be too much, but all the energy, it's like forcing huge amounts of energy through a system. It just burns out the system. The wires just get crisp, just like that. Many of you have that experience. You turn on, you get huge amounts of energy, and you can't use it. You don't know what to do with it. It just hangs around. Because you haven't given up certain models of who you are, and those models are what can only use little bits of energy. And you're overloading the circuits, and you say, man, it's too much. I lived with this fellow, Steve Durkee, a very high being, and every time I would say, oh, wow, too much, he'd say, no, just enough. So he got me, I'd get, oh, just enough. See, it's like when you take a parent who is has not been exposed to consciousness-expanding experiences or stimuli to the Fillmore, see? They often say, I'm getting a headache, see? How can you stand all this? All the projectors and all the sound and black lights and costumes and, the whole business. How can you stand it? Well, you can't stand it. That's the hope, see? That you can't stand it. That you say, okay, again, I die so hard. Here we go again. Go ahead, take me. Do with me, not my, but thy will. Not my, but thy will. That's what it's about. It's not the will of the cameraman up in the thing or the rock and roll band, because they're doing the will, and if they're not, it doesn't turn you on, because you only get turned on by the real spirit. And when the real spirit's there, man, you just open yourself to it. You can't bomb out that way, really. You spend so much time being frightened of demons, it really isn't worth it, because if you're pure in heart, it works. I mean, every fairy tale tells you it does. And they're all just as real as you are. I mean, Superman and Orphan Annie, they all exist on astral planes, see? Because man never creates anything, he just remembers. How do you like that? So then when the monk, it's apparent to the monk who is in charge of your death that you're not making it in the first bardo. He starts to tell you how to make it through the second bardo. He says, well, you've blown it on the 7th chakra, but now in the 6th chakra you could come out on this one and you don't have to be born again on the physical plane. So when you see this and see this groovy, you know. But for most monks they say, too much, much too much, still much too much. And so what the Book of the Dead, the Tibetan Book of the Dead is a description of each succeeding lower layer. Finally you get down to the 3rd chakra and the monk says, well, you're going to go back again. But when you go back, don't forget, when you get born again, do it quick this time by keeping in mind this. Then you forget that, and then he gives you instructions for lower ones, and finally, you start the cycle again, because you weren't ready to wake up that round. So that it's very apparent that what is evolving also for along with consciousness is an entirely different concept and understanding and approach to the process of dying. I have been pushing for a few years the institution called a Center for Dying, a place where people come to die consciously. And I thought, most people have to go to hospitals and everybody sits around saying, you're not going to die, you're looking better. Because everybody's freaked, see? Because a hospital is a temple dedicated to life. And death is its worst adversary, so it makes, it's like sitting in church talking about the devil. You talk about it in whispers. But some people are ready to die consciously. Right. Yeah. I'm sure that child remembers. And then the old days I thought, well, obviously the people that have taken lots of something or other who've known about this will be the perfect guides. So all the unemployed, what are they called, hippies? They can all become guides for people who want to die. But the institution's still too far out for the society. Although in India you can go to the burning ghat where people, it blew my mind in Benares, because I came to Benares, the Kashi, the city where Indians go to die, because when they die in that city they are totally liberated. You see, they've consciously chosen to come to that city to die, to be burned on the holy burning ghats, because at that point they become one and they're done. And so I would walk down the street, sometimes high on something or other. This was before I met my guru. And I would look at these people, and they would be dragging themselves across the street, and they'd be wearing a loincloth, and attached to the loincloth would be a little pouch which would have in it the money necessary for the wood for the fire, which would be roughly about $2.80. And they had made it. They were lame and sick and starving, and they would drag themselves around waiting for this moment, knowing it was about to come. And I walked through the streets, me, Western, with my American Express traveler's checks and my camera and my whole scene, feeling sorry for them. Look at these poor beings. Oh, this is what India's about. What a terrible economic... We've got to do something for these people. Get them off the streets. And at the same time, they were looking at me with total pity, because they knew I was a Westerner passing through and I wasn't going to make it like that. See, they had the easy way and I was screwed for many reasons culturally, and they felt sorry for me. And we sat there, stood there, and passed each there, feeling sorry for one another. And it was only later I began to understand where their heads were at. But see, you don't know when that moment's going to be. You don't know the moment you're going to die, unless you're already finished. Then you know. Holy beings in India know the moment, and they say next Tuesday at 3, and next Tuesday at 3, they turn around 3 times, sit down, and leave their body. They send a message, next Thursday I'm leaving my body, come on by. Okay? Ramana Maharshi, when he was dying of cancer, and all of his devotees were crying and saying his arm was all cancer, they said, Ramana Maharshi, you know, Bhagwan, God, you know, God incarnate, you are it all. Why don't you save your body? He says, no, it's finished its trip. It's time to go. And they said, don't leave us. And he said, don't be silly. Where can I go? So that every minute of your life, since you don't know which the moment is, every moment has got to be lived with your head in the place such that at that moment, that's the moment. It doesn't mean you sit around, is it going to be this moment, this moment? You just build your life so it is every moment. Every moment is the moment of death and rebirth. You get to live that way. Because life and death become so intimately involved with one another that finally they merge and you're both at the same moment. You're both dying and you're being born, always, again and again, every moment. Look, I am making all things new, says Jesus, over and over again. It's all a fresh moment. It's the eternal present. It's happening for the first time. Your child walks down the steps and it's Buddha meeting Buddha for the first time in the morning over the moo tea and rice or orange juice and coffee or whatever it is. It's always the first time again. Because it's just been manifest, just that moment. All over it. See, but knowing about the end point finally creates in you, grokking, feeling about that end point creates in you the thirst for tapasya, for austerities, for burning by fire. How do you like that? It's like you're looking to become a moth to walk into the flame. You're looking for methods to burn out your impurities. You're looking for techniques to get done. Now you're not a masochist. It's not at that level at all. It's just that once the seed has been planted, you can do nothing else but your sadhana, your spiritual work. You can't get off the path once you're on the path. And once you're on the path, everything you do becomes part of your sadhana. Every single thing, as we said last week with Meister Eckhart. Everything becomes part of your path. And you look around for systems and some of you reach out to systems such as those enunciated by Georges Gurdjieff, some through the church and through Christian mysticism, some through Hatha Yoga and Eastern yogic disciplines. And anybody that spends any time putting down anybody else's method is obviously caught in deep illusion. It's very poignant. Because it all is the spirit and it all works if you bring to it a pure enough heart. It may well be bhakti is the way in the Kali Yuga, but all the other ways are the same thing when you are pure. And there are currently examples of people moving up and up and up through layer after layer of consciousness using a variety of different yogas or methods of becoming one or union, yoga union. The method that I have been working with is called Raja Yoga or Ashtanga Yoga. I did not go seeking Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga was laid on me. I didn't ever seek anything. It all just happened to me. It was as if when I was a psychologist, I saw with the eyes of a psychologist, and then the mushroom was laid upon me, and then I saw with the eyes of a visionary, and then my lack of discipline made me something happen, and then a system is laid upon me, which now I see with the eyes of a yogi. Every step as you get into each new place in your consciousness, you look back on your whole life history and you see that it all had perfect meaning from this place too. And that a lot of things that seemed background become figures suddenly. See, you went all through school and if you wrote your biography in 1 year, you would write, and then I did this, and then I wrote this paper, and then this was published, and I became this. Then another year, you would suddenly be writing about, and I met this interesting kid who sat behind me, who nobody noticed, and one day this happened. You begin to see that your upa-gurus, as opposed to Satguru. A Satguru is the pure life. An upa-guru is anybody or anything along the way that takes you one step further, the next message. Birds, dogs, children, accidents, boredom, people you meet all the time, your enemies, they are all your upa-gurus, because anything that you are perceiving in this plane is the result of an attachment on your part. You've got to remember the basic rule I gave you last time. Desire creates the universe. Your desires create your universe. So that everything you see or know as called your universe is merely a reflection of your uncooked seeds of desire. Okay? Because who you are is it all. You wouldn't be seeing anything if you were who you are. Okay? You're only seeing something because you forgot you're it already. It's like looking at your own eyes, looking at your own eyes, looking at your own eyes.
This podcast is brought to you by the Love Serve Remember Foundation and ramdas.org. We appreciate you listening, and we appreciate all the support that you've given us. Please continue that support and donate at ramdas.org. We can then continue to share what Ram Dass has been sharing for all of these years. Thank you.
The game is to be where you are, be it honestly and as consciously as you know how.
Watch the latest Ram Dass documentary film, Becoming Nobody, on Gaia.com.
Of course, there was fear in losing that familiar identity. But there was always also wonder.
The Gaia.com library supports you with transformational content. See it for yourself and go to Gaia.com/BeHereNow and check out the Be Here Now playlist, curated just for you. Visit Gaia.com/BeHereNow and start your free trial today.
Hi, and welcome back to Ram Dass Here and Now. And I'm Raghu Marcus. And we have a talk here that Ram Dass gave a long time ago. We've been picking talks that have recently been digitized. And that whole initiative is going forward. And so we have this wealth of material now to choose from. And by the way, thanks to everyone for your support. Without that support, we couldn't even begin this process. And I'd say we're over halfway done, maybe something like that. So this talk now, usually I listen to talks and go through them a little bit, and and I'm picking up on content and titles and something that jives with whatever I may be going through myself and how it might help me, which amazingly, these talks, even after all these years of knowing Ram Dass and hearing so many talks doing this kind of work, I am still so amazed to find so much of what still is so very meaningful. to me, um, again, after all these years. This talk, though, what grabbed me about this talk was more about the tone, the presence. It reminded me of those early days when I first met Ram Dass. And I know many people have talked about that. Meeting him. There's a wonderful book, by the way, which you can get on ramdas.org in the store called "Remarkable Encounters with Ram Dass," and it's many people's recollections of their meeting with him and how it affected their lives. It's really pretty good. And another great way to support the foundation. So I I picked up on this again because of the presence, and just the feeling tone. It was very, very deep. And as I was listening, and this used to happen to us when we were, just going to these lectures in the early days with Ram Dass, and then, meeting him and going to his father's farm and doing, getting acquainted with the practices that he had brought back from India, from yoga to chanting and Sufi dancing. And I don't know if he brought that back from India, but that was part of the regimen. But there was, a way in which, beyond the message of the words, there was a place that we dipped down into that was just a depth that we hadn't really experienced before. Anyhow, so I'm sitting here listening to some of this and started to get settled in a way, during the moments that I listened to this that day. I was in the middle of my work day, and my mind was, doing its usual thing, trying to, capture and think of all the things that I needed to do, like we all do every day. And then as I started to listen to this, and I'm making notes and all of that about what it's about, I started to settle, as I said, in a deeper way with just the presence. I mean, he must have been in that moment, and like everybody, he went through different moments, and this was really a beautiful heart space. So I hope you enjoy it from that vantage point. Also, not to say that there was some really great content in here, and basically he's talking here about the stages of the journey that we all are on. And as we get into it, we go from our identification with body, identification with psyche, through identification with soul, and then ultimately to the ultimate identification with God, or whatever that word means to you. Can be, pure mind, can be, whatever any of the nomenclature that suits you can be. So, and, I love this one thing that he said, that the what we're really looking for, excuse me, is it's a journey towards simplicity and quietness. I don't know, that really strikes me now. Maybe it would have struck me less back when, but it really strikes me now to a kind of joy that's out of time. And it's a journey that leaves behind every model of who we are or who we think we are. And it involves that kind of transformation of our beings. And, I like it. So the simplicity and quietness, I mean, I relate to that, another thought that he had in this, that he said, many of us have become so enamored of the super intenseness of the experience, the spiritual experiences is what I'm thinking of, that we couldn't imagine anything beyond it. Yet at every point we reached it was so much beyond everything else. So every time there was another experience that led us to understand, a deeper, to connect with a deeper part of ourselves. And I remember in my earliest days, discovering Ram Dass, and then going off to India, and of course being with Neem Karoli Baba Maharaji. there was tons of, just outlandish experiences. Uh, just I could say some of the time I felt like I was on acid. It was that intense of an experience. And I remember getting caught every time in the experience, not wanting it to go away or wanting it to come back. And that went on and on and on until I started to have some grip on the reality of what he's talking about now, because it's not about experience. It's about returning to a simplicity and quietness and a joy that's out of time. So I love that statement, and it is, I can relate to it probably more now than I did at that time when, you know, things were super intense. It was all new. It was fantastic, and we were sharing it all together. We would share our experiences, our dreams. These just incredible happenings on a day-to-day basis. So, but as I said, I was more enamored with this particular talk by its presence and tone. And so to kind of just let it sink in as you go through it, it's that there is now I've only as I do, I pick a certain part of the talk, and as I've done with this, there is a more to the talk that you will be, and it includes an official great meditation. In other words, I find the whole thing meditative, but he actually does a meditation that's just absolutely wonderful, a half-hour meditation that is the end of the entire talk. And this talk is going to be available through our partner,